The First Jesuits, why did I write it? I wrote it because basically the way the Society of Jesus was commonly described was to fight Protestantism and to reform the Catholic Church, which I found, I mean, there's a grain of truth in those expressions, but basically the whole thing needed a quite reorientation. So what are some of the main themes of the book as I see them? Well, one of the themes is, that runs through it, is that they changed. The group that, and the vision that they had in Paris, 1534, and then Rome in 1539, the way they saw things, there was this deep continuity, but also there was change. They evolved in time. They were different in 1556 when Ignatius died from what they were in 1540. So tried to get away from that substantialism, that substantialistic approach to Jesuit history that was all in the mind of Ignatius from the beginning and just kind of worked itself out. No, it was trial and error. It was seizing opportunities and fighting off foes. So the change is a big theme in the book. It's kind of an underlying presupposition of what I was doing. Another theme of the book is that their ministries, to a large extent, began to define them. What they did was indicative of, informative of what they were. They were pastorally oriented with their preaching, with their reading of confessions, with their works of spiritual and corporal assistance, works of mercy, and then the schools, again, really redefined them in many important ways. Another theme of the book is that Ignatius was the central figure. He was the inspiration. He was the person who gave him the basic orientation. But we must look at the corporate enterprise. There were lots of talented people contributing to this enterprise, and they need to be taken into account because they did affect what happened. And among those, none more important than Juan Alfonso de Polanco and Geronimo Nadal. They were, it was a perfect team in a sense. I mean, and again, looking at Ignatius as a leader, what is one quality which any leader must have? That is to pick good collaborators, good assistants, someone with gifts beyond what the person himself has and complements those gifts. And he could not have done better than with Polanco and Nadal. Polanco at home, organizing things, a big vision, self-effacing if there ever was one. I mean, he just was kind of let Ignatius take all the credit in a sense. And then Nadal out there in the field. He was the great agent in the field, telling Jesuits what they were all about, inspecting, promulgating the constitutions, founding schools. So it was a perfect team. Another big theme of the book is that the schools were not simply one ministry among the others, one that they kind of added on beginning about 1557, 1558, but that it soon became the principal ministry, in most people's eyes, the defining ministry. And one thing the book did, it kind of turned the question around. I mean, other histories about the Jesuits said, well, what impact did the Jesuit schools have on society? What did it have on Catholicism? Important question, difficult to answer. I tried to turn the question around to what impact did the schools have on the Society of Jesus? And I think it had an extremely important one. It, for one thing, the Jesuit schools, most of them, were what we could roughly call secondary schools. As I say, they did have a few universities, but most of them were secondary schools so that the students were finished there when they were 17 or 18 years old. They were very intense schools. When they finished there, they had a complete education. But the curriculum was literary works of pagan antiquity. And the purpose of the schools was not to train clerics, although clerics were often students in the schools, I mean future clerics, but to train laymen for this world. So it gave the Jesuits another foot in this world that was special and unique and first for a religious order. When I began, I really didn't have a clear idea of how all this was going to fit together. But as I continued, as I was doing the research and writing, these themes became clear to me, and it was in many ways a refashioning of how we look at the early history of the society, moving away from an almost exclusive focus on Ignatius, moving away from a kind of a static approach to the school, giving due allowance to Polanco and Nadal, kind of clarifying their role, which was so important, and this teamwork, and then the work of the others, important figures like Canisius and Borgia, people like this. So those were, I'd say, basically the things that became newly clear to me. And I think what another thing that became clear to me, which I tried to do in the book, and maybe as a theme of the book, was to place the Jesuits clearly and firmly in the cultural context of the era. And I felt that my background, the earlier work I had done as a historian that had nothing to do with the Jesuits, gave me a framework and approach that so many other people who had been writing about the Jesuits did not have. My work, for instance, in Renaissance humanism, made me feel that I understood what humanism was, because so much work had been done, good scholarly work had been done in the 1950s and 60s by other scholars that I was able to piggyback on and then sort of immerse myself in when working with preaching at the papal court, the sermons on the papal court, and working with this prior general of the Augustinian order, the whole history of preaching, those things that I had sort of in my bag, you might say, before I sort of late in life began to write about the Jesuits. You know, the First Jesuits were published by Harvard University Press, and as with every academic publisher, almost every publisher, you submit the manuscript, and then the manuscript is sent out to readers who advise the press whether or not to publish it, and if they're going to publish it, what changes should be made, and so forth. So the two readers were very positive. One was a man from Harvard University. Another was a man by the name of William Baalsma from the University of California, Berkeley, who was a Christian, but was Dutch Reformed in his earlier life, then became an Episcopalian, and was very interested in religious questions in this period. He wrote a very important Life of Calvin, for instance. At any rate, I got his report back, and what struck me was he said, I was deeply moved in reading this book. It's a book about spirituality. Well, I didn't know I was writing a book about spirituality. I thought I was writing the story of the early Jesuits. But upon reflection, I think he did hit on something that's very important in the book, that it's about not just about what the Jesuits did, which is very important, but it's about sort of the well springs of their motivation. Let's call that spirituality. Why they were doing what they were doing and what their goals were. So that's a first reaction to it. Then I have to say it was widely reviewed in both professional journals and religious journals, Protestant and Catholic, like Commonweal, Christian Century, and then also in some newspapers. And kind of across the board, the reaction was positive. I had really no major criticism of it, which is a kind of miracle. I mean, escaped that. And since then, it's now in, or soon will be in at least 10 languages with a pirated edition in Russian circulating, which is, I guess you can't really count. So that's been very gratifying, and I think it's been very important in not simply among Jesuits, but in the wider academic world, and even in a wider world than that, getting a look at the Society of Jesus. I did not write the book for Jesuits. I hoped Jesuits would read it and get something out of it. But I wrote it for a wider public, especially a professional academic public, but I wanted to make it accessible to other people who were interested in the Jesuits, and it seemed that to some extent at least I succeeded in doing that.